Hi, my name is John Washington, and welcome to this episode of Black Beat Podcast, where we are just simply unapologetic about being black. And today I have a very special guest on the podcast today, and I'll tell you, as I was listening to her presentation in there today, it elicited some emotions for me because I remember the win and on some of these things, and I remember Dr. Davis in her statuesque form and the way she would just stand with all those brothers when it was about that liberation in that time. It was just something special. But as I was watching you present today, I was seeing such elegance and such grace. And I remember those days, it was kind of difficult for us back in those days, because I grew up in Paterson, New Jersey. And I remember marching with the Mars brothers, down the street, as all of us 16-year-old young cats out there in a line walking, making sure we was keeping peace in the neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff. But the question that I'm having for you right now, Doctor, is where did all the grace come from, and was it always there? I mean, there's such elegance and such the demeanor. Is it the world travel? Is it just time? Is it what how? Because how I saw you back then was just really just this sister that was in the game and ready to put it out. So
let's um, let's remember that media projections, are often very different from the reality.
yeah.
Um, I think that I've always been a relatively shy person. So in many ways, I
would
have to.
never know that.
Yeah, people are very surprised, but I've always been passionately committed to the Black Liberation Movement, to other movements. That this has been my life. My mother was an activist, and I think I inherited that from her. But I never imagined myself as being in the forefront of movements. I never imagined myself as being the person whom the cameras were focused on. I always wanted to do educational work, organizing. I thought that that would be my role. And I didn't, I guess you might say I had to learn how to be that person who was out front. And that happened only because of a historical accident.
Tell us about that.
The historical accident was that I was targeted. I was targeted first by the governor of California when I was fired from my first teaching position. Remember, I was a student and then a professor of philosophy. And had it not been for the fact that I was targeted, no one would know my name.
Wow.
And I know full well that it's not because of something that I did as an individual that brought me so much publicity, but rather I happened to be targeted because I was a part of a movement.
Yeah.
And
a large movement.
as far as what you call grace, I don't know where that comes from. Maybe I inherited it from my mother. Maybe it's a consequence of living.
What kept you on the path? I've never heard anything come out of your mouth over the years, or whatever, about if you had a practice of belief, or what just kept you fortified? What kept you always moving toward the goal, to where you've been able to surpass most of the ones that were around during that time and still available and still on the road and still having a journey? What's the driving force behind all that? Was there ever a practice? Do you have a practice that you believe in? I just never heard that
Well,
part
I have a
about you.
spiritual practice, if that's what you're
Yeah.
referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The driver behind the woman.
But I think that has come later. I think my foundation was believing in the possibility of radical change. And I've embraced that belief that it is possible to change the world since I was
Wow.
a very small girl. My mother was an activist in the organization that was called the Southern Negro Youth Congress.
Mm.
It was created by black members of the Communist Party, and they were doing amazing work in the South prior to the civil rights movement. As a matter of fact, the work that they did against the Ku Klux Klan, defending black women who had been gang raped
Yeah.
by the Klan, the work that they did actually set the stage
Yeah.
for the civil rights movement. Let me say this. I don't know how to live my life any other way. This is what brings me fulfillment. This is what has created the person that I identify with as myself.
Right on. And sis, when you look at it, because when I was listening to you speak and about the four girls in Alabama, it was so emotional for me at that point in time because I remember what that time was like back then. But you've obviously experienced many of those times over throughout that. Where do you store all that stuff? I mean, powerful. You've taken in so much in the imagery. How does it affect you over the years, or has it affected you over the years?
Of course, it affects me. It's a part of the reason why I continue to live in the world. As I said before, I knew the girls, and I continue to be inspired by them to do the work that I'm doing today. We evoke their memories, and just because people have passed on does not mean that they're no longer an active presence in the world. So I see myself also as carrying on, not so much for myself as an individual, but for all of those who have fallen along the way.
What was Jack Brown and those guys like? What were they like? I mean, as young cats, man, were they just shakers and movers, or what were they? What were they like? Used to read some of their books, but
No, I think that's a valid question, but I think that that people are made by movements. H. Rap Brown is unfortunately in prison today, and we have to free him. He's, on the roll of all of those we want to have released from imprisonment. But I can tell you a more collective story about rap. I was actually a member of an organization that came into being as a result of the short alliance between SNCC and the Black Panther Party, right? I mean, I was active in the Black Panther Party, then I became active in SNCC, and then the two of them merged. Rap was arrested, and it was, you'll probably remember, I don't know if you remember when he was arrested for speaking out. And his bail was $100,000.
Back then, it was a lot of money.
That was a huge amount of money. And we developed a campaign to raise his bail by going in the community in Los Angeles, in Watts. As a matter of fact, I can still remember the tin cans that we used with like little slots. And then we mimeographed a page that said "Let Rap Rap," and put it around each one of those tin cans. and raised a huge amount of money
Wow.
with people going and knocking on doors and telling, we didn't have the internet then. We hardly, black people were never on TV. Those were the days when if you saw a black person on TV, you would call everybody in the house, just to
Let alone, no, other than
right,
James Brown. I mean,
right, that's true.
Yeah.
So that was a wonderful collective campaign to release, and we did raise enough money. We raised the $100,000 to get him released.
Wow. Wow.
Um,
So community, I hear you speak about, even in the room full of educators, what rang out pretty clearly was the fact that community and the engagement and involvement in that is a great vehicle for education and movement. Speak a little bit more about that, because I mean, after all, and I also heard you speak that education was liberation. And when we think about all the money invested in education in this country, hasn't, and as you stated, there hasn't been really effective, but talk a little bit more about this community form of education that you've been talking a little bit about young students being more involved in the community, having more community and participation with things. I mean, what is your thoughts about, and how did you arrive to that form of thinking, and what was that all about?
Well, I have for a very long time tried to be critical of the individualism that is offered to people in this country as the only way to live one's life. To the extent that people are often under the impression that they alone are responsible for who they are and where they are in the world. And of course, no human can ever be anything without community. We're produced by community. We live in community. But we often don't know how to acknowledge the social ties that are responsible for allowing us to be who we become. So for one, as I said during the conference presentation, I don't think that there's anything that I've ever done that I've done as an individual. Anything significant, anything of importance that has not also involved other people. But we don't learn how to value that connection with others, with people who inspire us, with people who help us, with people who give us opportunities. I just recently wrote a book. The last book that I published was written with 3 other people. And that was a very, usually you think about writing a book as a solitary
Or a
activity.
ghostwriter.
Or you get a ghostwriter. Yeah, exactly. But this was such an interesting experience because we all had to learn how to recognize what we had to learn from the other, and that our ideas were not nearly as important as we assumed that they were. And that sometimes we had to let our ideas go. I had to let my ideas go because someone else had figured out how to say it better. Yeah.
So why philosophy?
Well, I decided as an undergraduate to major in philosophy because I thought it would help me change the world. And, well, of course, Marx said in the 11th Feuerbach thesis, philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. So I'm the kind of philosopher who believes in praxis as well as theory. And I've always sought ways to put my philosophical knowledge to practice in the social world.
Right on. I was thinking about Trump, but I was thinking about how comfortable I felt when Obama was in office and how community I felt. But then Trump came into office, and the first thing that came back to me was the need to carry my gun. What was your thoughts about that whole transition and that experience? Could you share your perception about what you saw in that transition with Obama and Trump?
Well, first of all, I think Obama was elected not so much because of who he was or is, but because there were organizers and vast numbers of young people, especially, who did not believe that it was impossible to elect a black person to office. Because I can remember when there were young people saying that we're going to support Obama for president, and then older black people were still linked to Hillary because they didn't think it was possible. So for me, the importance of Obama being elected was it demonstrated the possibility of making change. Now, Obama did not do everything he should have done. So I'm always critical.
Got you.
So I think it was so important that Obama was elected, but at the same time, he could have used his position. Yeah. I mean, I still have Guantanamo. And you remember he was campaigning on shutting down Guantanamo. It's still there. So there are a number of things that I could say. But let's move on to the second person you mentioned, whose name I do not pronounce in public, by the way. And I engage in that practice because I believe in the West African tradition of naming being a source of empowerment. So if you refuse to call someone's name, it is also to deny them power. So there's some other people that I refer to as what's his name, maybe down in Florida, in places like that.
Tend to tell me the same thing.
But I think that sometimes we fail to recognize that when we win victories, there are going to be those who desperately try to return to the original set of circumstances. And that's exactly what happened. The right wing, the white nationalists, the racists, they organized, and we're still in that moment, particularly in the aftermath of what happened during the pandemic, when such huge numbers of people showed up to demonstrate against racism.
Yeah.
And especially white people.
Yeah.
Because that more white people were out in the streets around the issue of racism than ever before in the history of this country. So you better believe that people like, what's his name down in Florida, began to try to figure out how to counteract that tendency, how to make sure that white kids don't learn about Black history or don't recognize that critical theory is so important to the educational process of critical theory in general, but of course critical race theory is about recognizing that race is constructed. It's not, there's nothing that we can say that is natural about the assumption of Blacks' inferiority.
Yeah, that's that one. Yeah, that one. Dr. Davis, as I was sitting watching you on the stage, and there have been some opportunities that I've had to do similar things. And after I've gotten off of that stage, I thought sometimes about some of the process that went on in that. And I often in my mind sort of recall I wished I would have said, or I thought I might.
Yeah.
Do you have?
Oh, I always
anything-
have. I always.
Do you have one? Because in light of our time, do you have some things that you wished you would have dropped, or some pearls of wisdom or insight that you
But
wish?
there are too many. Too many.
That's just how you
Because
appreciate that.
you can never say everything,
Yeah.
and it is actually futile
Yeah.
to assume that you're always going to say everything to everyone that should be said.
Yes.
But there is one thing that I wish I had emphasized, because we were talking about the educational process. We were talking about knowledge, and then we just recently talking about those people who should not be named. And I wish I could have emphasized that the sign of a good education is recognizing what one does not know.
Mm.
Recognizing that the more knowledge you acquire, the more you realize you don't know. So if you walk around thinking that you know all there is to know about whatever, then you're going to be precisely like those people we were talking about, who know nothing, yet they assume they know everything.
What's next for you, sis? You've had such a hell of a journey. It sounds like some more fun stuff is in store. What's next?
Actually, I've had fun along the way, and something that I have realized is that many people often assume that being involved in movements is only all about sacrifice, because the assumption is there are more fun things that one could be doing.
Yeah, it's sacrificing, right?
But I don't think. I don't think I sacrificed happiness. I don't think I've sacrificed joy, because I can't imagine doing things any other way. And I realized that there's been a lot of joy along the way. I think a lot about music now. I've written a book about music.
Whoa. You a musician, doctor?
I'm not a musician, but I have been interested in aesthetics and the impact of art and music. And I've done a lot of work with a lot of jazz musicians, and I continue to do that work today.
Yeah.
And that's something that brings me joy in the process of doing the work.
We got to
That's
get you
gonna
back here for the
bring about
Vanport
change.
Jazz Festival. We got to get you back.
As a matter of fact, at the last Monterey Jazz Festival, I and two other people, Terry Lynn Carrington and Gina Dick, did a conversation that was about music and abolition.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it was I was impressed by the attendance, particularly since there were amazing live jazz musicians all around. But we talked about the part that musicians, jazz musicians especially, are the part that they're playing in further popularizing prison abolition,
Okay.
police abolition, etc.
Okay. Boy, we can go on for a minute, but the last one I want to drop, and I'd like you to give me some feedback. It's a little bit of current events today, present. The Strip, Israel. Where you at? What's your thoughts?
Well, I have been involved in Palestine Solidarity since I was in college. A very long time. When I was in jail, Palestinian prisoners smuggled out a message of solidarity that was then brought to me in my jail cell. So and I also have to say that on the other hand, I recognize, maybe not on the other hand, but it's a part of the same process, that Jewish people have played a really important role in the struggle against racism.
Yeah.
And the first white people I ever met in the South, in the segregated South, were Jewish people who were challenging racism in Birmingham, Alabama. So for me, it's never been about a conflict between doing work against anti-Semitism and doing work to support the Palestinian people. And I look at the way in which the Israeli government, and let's remember that the government is not equal to the people.
Oh.
So there are many Israeli Jews who are challenging the governmental policies and practices in the same way we in the U.S. challenge the governmental
Right.
policies and practices of in Washington. So I am very upset to see all of the stereotypes that are being used, the ways in which Palestinians are referred to as human animals.
Exactly, yeah, drive them back under the rock and all that stuff. But do you think this is this is it ethical as where we sit standing with this the way it is right now in terms of their Israel's response to something, or was that response prompted?
Well, we have a whole cabal of 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 people like the ones who shall not be named down in Florida and so forth,
That's what.
who are trying to move us in a backwards direction. We see the same thing in the government of Israel, Netanyahu, and it is, I think, it is a part of an effort to seize power and to put Palestinians in an untenable situation. They're calling upon 1.2 million people, Palestinians, and who live in Gaza, to leave Gaza. And there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So it appears as if they're setting them up for a massacre.
Yeah.
And I am so upset. It's so sad. But at the same time, I recognize how important it is to do work that will generate some resistance.
Yeah. Doctor, there's an emotional undertone in this interview with me and you right about now, and it is rooted in grace. And I want you to know that this is one of those moments that I've reflected after being around for as long as I have, and I've been observing and being a part of life and going through this Black experience. You're an icon in it. And I just want you to know I'm honored to have this opportunity to spend some time with you and to touch your spirit a little deeper. And so, sister, thank you so much for coming and being a part of this little bit of time and space with us, and especially with me. And I will honor this and hold this in esteem for this little bit of time I got left. And for those of you viewing us at Black Beat Podcast, listen here. I told you, we unapologetic about some of this stuff. You sitting talking to an icon and a sister that's been around and in the battle and doing the dance. So y'all, I appreciate y'all listening to this podcast, but this sister's bona fide, and we do appreciate her showing up in this environment and being a part of that. And thank you again, sis. I know you had a long day, and so we're going to honor that, and thank you for the time. All right? Thank y'all.